we have a guest in the house today in a very important conversation we want to engage you right now. And when I was going off, I said we're talking employment. We have people who work here in Uganda, but also others that work outside Uganda, but also those who come from outside and come here. Now, there is a lot of semantics right there. So many a time we have confused it and many have gotten into trouble because they don't have contracts. Because when you are working, you are supposed to have a contract, but sometimes you may not know that you actually need it. Now, the topic for today is why migrant workers need contracts. We shall get to understand who are these migrant workers. And so we have Robinah Kagoye, the Executive Director, Voices for Labour. You are so welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, I want you to first greet our viewers before we dive into our conversation.
Good morning, viewers. It's very humbling to be here. Especially talk about something I'm passionate about, and that is workers.
Oh, yes. Well, you're almost welcome. And yes, for you, it's humbling. For us, it's such an honor to have you here, because we have so many people out there that are even planning to get out of the country, or even those that have already left the country but then flying once in a while, but they have no idea, especially about what we are talking about today, contracts. And before we get into the contracts, one should be asking themselves, who are migrant workers?
Okay, migrant workers are persons or people who have made a conscious decision to leave their country to another country to search for greener pastures or for economic development, but to make it simpler, to go and work in another country. Yes.
Okay, so that is very clear. If you are Ugandan and you decide to get out of Uganda to go to another nation for work, you are a migrant worker. And so another question that would come to mind is if there are any laws out there that do govern this migration, you going out to work, or labor exploitation, we could call it.
Yes. Yes, we have laws that govern labor export, and we have the Employment Act of 2006, which provides for, I would say, a licensing regime of recruitment agencies that export labor. But we also have special regulations that were passed in 2005, and I think they were amended. And those those regulations govern Ugandan migrant workers, workers who go to work abroad, Ugandans who go to work abroad.
Yes.
And what is in those regulations are processes, the requirements that govern the migration labor export. But I would emphasize that basically the law really talks about a licensing regime, that for it talks about the requirements of the processes and the requirements, then who is supposed to export, who is supposed to do export. For instance, you cannot, as a human being, as a natural person, you can't do export. You have to be registered as a company, and after being registered as a company, you should be licensed by the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. You should have permit to do that. So, but individuals in their capacities cannot start exporting
labor.
It is supposed to be companies that are fully registered, licensed, and given permits to do so, to do external labor. So in those regulations, of course, there are requirements of what you should really have. For example, the minimum capital a company should have, the guarantees, a bank guarantee, and then the necessary, of course, amenities that you're supposed to have for you to really qualify as a company that should deal in labor export. So we have regulations, but they deal so much more on a licensing regime.
Oh, yeah.
They don't really put in place areas of protection. The significant area of protection that the law talks about is just the requirement of companies being licensed. And of course, in there are certain requirements for those licenses, for example, and that have been put there administratively in the Ministry of Labor. Like, for example, a company, for you to be given permission to export a certain number of workers, you should have in place certain things, for example, a job order, and then you should write to the ministry how many people you're externalizing, their details, and then you should get approval, and then that's the legal process. Actually, even the contracts should be attached. Yes.
Now, when we come to contracts, we have realized that so many actually who are out there either don't have contracts, or they have contracts they cannot even interpret, and so they are suffering. And today we are discussing if they need contracts. Why do they need contracts, actually, if we could start there?
Yes. Of course they need contracts, because you see, I'll talk about external labor, especially to the Gulf region, where we're having Saudi Arabia and Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, the Gulf region, because that's where we are having most of the people migrating to work. A contract is very important for them, because you see, most of these contracts, first of all, they are fixed term. They give you a contract and they say you're going to work for 2 years, you're going to work for 1 year. Now, the reason that's why you should have that written contract, it is where you're going to have safeguards. Yeah, you have to, how much you're going to earn. Some entitlements you're going to have, for example, leave. Some of their contracts, I've read them, they have a provision for leave, like 1 month, where you have to come back. You can come back to your country, or you can have 1 month off to rest. And then they have insurance, health insurance, where they're going to work in case they fall sick, in case they need medical assistance. Some of those clauses are there. But a contract is actually, it safeguards a migrant worker more than even just the employment entitlements. It's about safety, because we've seen many people being trafficked.
Yes.
When you have a contract, it's more, you're more of a documented migrant worker, that when your contract ends, you can easily be repatriated back. But also in law, in case you fall into the hands of a wrong employer, but you had a contract, then it is easy to help you, because that contract provides an evidential value. We can trace which company here externalized you, and then who was the employer at the other side. Of course, sometimes what really happens, also what workers need to know, the ones that are going to work in the Gulf, is that we are having some sort of a triangular employment relationship in this external labor. We have a company here in Uganda that is externalizing you, that is going to give you a contract, to give you a contract. But that contract, that contract does not give you an employment relationship with the company here. Instead, there's a company also doing the same work as this one. That's also actually a recruitment company in maybe Saudi Arabia. It is that one that is giving you a contract. Now, some of the problems that arise, and sometimes workers are not aware, they think they're going to work for that company in Saudi Arabia. But that company is also just a recruitment agency, though you're retaining an employment relationship with them. So they are the ones that supply you to your final destination. They are the ones that supply you to your final employer. And in most cases, they're the ones who pay your salaries. But you see, we are having 3 people here.
Yes.
We are having 3 actors here. We are having a Ugandan company that has externalized you, that is connecting you to a company in Saudi Arabia. Then that Saudi Arabian company takes you to your final destination of employment.
Wow.
So there's there's a triangular employment relationship there.
Now, when we talk about contracts, because I believe it has lots of clauses, like you said, and some, if you can skip them, actually can land you in trouble. We know most of them do get out there, their passports are taken, they
Yes.
have nothing, their phones and all. Is this all stipulated in a contract? Because I believe there are particular things that the person should be looking out for. Because I know someone could be watching right now and they're saying, okay, fine, if I get the contract, do I rush to where I sign? What is specific that is going to protect me that I should look out for before I sign?
So first of all, it's not good to just rush and sign. And one thing also we should know that these contracts are written in Arabic, though they have clauses in Arabic, but then translated in English. But it's always good, at least. In fact, if maybe with the new Employment Act, I mean the amendments that are going to, if they are assented to, because they had actually done the employment amendment bill had provided really some comprehensive clauses for external labor externalization. So one of the things, the pre-departure conditions or the due diligence before you depart. One of those due diligence for a worker is actually looking out for that contract and understanding the contents of that contract. What is in that contract? Does it really safeguard me? Does it really give me some sort of security? So some of those clauses, first of all, they pertain also to salary, because sometimes they are lied to. They tell them you're going to earn this. When they reach there, they start giving you something else. Yeah. And the other thing is also about repatriation, because that has been one of the biggest issues. When they reach there and their contracts end, they are left to nobody. Sometimes they would want to come back. Of course, there are those ones actually whose contracts stipulate that after, when your contract ends, like after 1 year, you come back to Uganda. You're supposed to come back. But of course, there are those ones who want to just, maybe because they don't understand, when their contract ends, they become vulnerable.
They don't know what next.
They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do.
Yes.
Sometimes they are chased, and then they don't understand why they're being chased. Yeah. So they become actually very vulnerable. But in most cases, when your contract comes to an end, because in most cases these are fixed term contracts, they have a beginning and an end. So when it's coming to an end, one of the things you should look out in that contract is a repatriation clause. Who is going to repatriate you?
That is true.
Is it this company in Uganda? Is it the one in Saudi Arabia? Is it your employer, your foreign employer?
Or it's up to you.
Or it's up to you. You have to know that. Because that is where most people have become so vulnerable. When the contract ends, they become confused on how they get back. Should they get another job? And they end up actually being undocumented, because in most cases also the work permit they have is for that
the period.
Yes, that
period. Contract period.
So they, when the period expires, they become actually illegal wherever they are, and then they become very vulnerable, because when the employer knows that your contract has ended, you're now becoming an illegal immigrant, they can do anything with you. Yeah.
Now that raises the question of what should we do? I mean, what happens? Who can I run to? Is it to the embassy? Because in case of anything, repatriation comes in two forms. There is when your contract ends, and there is actually also that termination of contract in case of any misunderstanding. But then there is when you are dead. I know according to the law, repatriation is supposed to be for your employer sometimes. Most of the cases, actually.
Yes.
But like you said, the contracts can be adjusted. Sometimes someone is running away from the responsibility, throwing it to another. So they may get stuck, like you said, one, because they didn't understand the contract, or maybe the terms were not actually what was on ground, because you agree on one thing and another happens. Where can they go? What happens to them?
So before I go there, I would still look at, you see, this is something, these are some of the things the law should have provided.
Yes.
Yeah. Instead of having a law that only talks about licensing, we were supposed to have at least clauses that protect, especially that repatriation clause. But the new, the amendment, the bill that was passed by Parliament, but it hasn't yet been assented to, actually places a duty of repatriation of such workers on the recruitment agencies in Uganda.
Wow.
Yes. So in practice, right now we don't, of course, the law hasn't yet been assented to, but still in practice, the recruitment agencies this side are having that burden of bringing the workers back.
You're the
they're
one who
ones
took them
placed
out.
them there.
Yes, so you
then you
ought to
should have
bring
a
them
duty
back.
to bring them back.
Yes.
And that is also the mind of the bill. If you place them there, then you have the duty to bring them back. Because as I told you, the challenge with externalization is a triangular kind of employment relationship. Even the government doesn't know who is your final employer there. But we know this recruitment agency that took you. So then the recruitment agency has a duty to bring you back. But one of the things in practice that could really work, we have Ugandan embassies there. But of how, whether it has been effective and whether it has been easy for these migrant workers to report cases there, because some of them are found in very uncomfortable positions where they don't have phones. They are not even, they are literally like slaves. They are not even allowed to leave their houses. So they can't really get that help, and they become like more of modern slaves. But in principle, the ideal situation would be for our embassies to have labor attaches.
Yes,
labor attaches. Yes. If we had labor attaches in our embassies, then it would be so easy
to
just
follow
like
up.
The way we are having labor officers here, that when I get an issue with my boss at work, I can run to the labor office and report my grievances. That is what we need also in those countries where most of the Ugandans are being externalized. We need labor attaches. And surprising, that is something we also didn't see in the bill, but it should have been there. The government should commit itself at least to put labor attaches there, because it's getting a lot of money from externalization. So it wouldn't be so much for them to just do that for the workers that are being externalized there, because they are contributing so much to the economic development of the country.
That is true. And I thank God that you are a voice for the labor. And I was actually going to ask you that question, but now you've thrown it back. Whereby the labor attaches are very, very important, especially in such cases, like you said, that some of them become like slaves. They cannot even go out. They don't have the phone, like how the ministry was suggesting that maybe when they go back in the new memorandum with the Gulf region, that you can call in case of anything. But if you don't have a phone, how are you going to call in? Exactly. So now this is where the labor attaches come in, and they have to be going and checking on them. That's
they should be given inspection powers.
Yes, inspection and know the addresses and all. So I'm going to ask you to amplify that voice and ensure that the ministry really does this, because most of these things are on paper, but they're not being put in practice. Now, we've come to the end of our time, and I don't know if there are any parting shots to a person out there that wants to leave the country, a person that is already out but is coming in once in a while, or a relative, on how they can advise their people when it comes to contracts for migrant workers.
To someone who wants to go to another country to look for greener pastures, especially in the Gulf region, because that is where we are having so many issues to do with rights. They need really to, first of all, they need to go through licensed companies. That is very, very fundamental, because you also realize that research has also shown that most of the workers that are mistreated actually don't go through the right channels.
Yes.
They either go through companies that are not licensed, or actually individuals. They're individuals, and that is more of trafficking, individuals who are doing it. And so with individuals, it's very hard for you to hold them accountable, because already there's an illegality. So they have to first make sure that this company is licensed. And the Ministry of Labour always, it has a display of licensed companies. And
yes, it does.
What Uganda should know, that actually there are very many companies there out that are not licensed. If you go just in your neighborhood, you're going to be seeing so much work abroad. When you go in the ministry and you find that these companies don't even reach 300 companies in the whole company, the whole country that are licensed. So it's better to go to the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. There's a department there for external labor. Find out, is this company licensed? Is it up to date? because there are those ones that are licensed, but they're not even actually up to date. So is it really licensed? So if it's licensed, then are there job orders? Because they'll tell you, we are taking you to do security guard, we are going to take you to be a maid.
There is no need.
Yes,
even. Yeah.
actually. And then sometimes they even get money from you, and you pay money in advance, and then later it turns out that there was no job order. So you need to do your due diligence, and then the contract. For the contract, if you can't read, it will still be better for you to request for a copy of that contract, to go and take it to someone who can interpret it for you, who can really make you understand what you're going into. So that, you see, when you're empowered, when you know something, it's much more better. You know how to fight. But unfortunately, some of these girls, especially the ones that go as maids, they actually don't know anything. Someone gets them from the village, and he's actually the one understanding for them, and or they just tell them sign, and they don't know what they're signing. When they reach there, they become very vulnerable.
Oh my God, yes. It is important for you that is viewing that really you push for a contract, be it a relative, a friend, whoever tells you wants to go out, ask them these questions. But even as we part, me and you, I'm going to ask you to ask the ministry to task those companies that do take out people to follow through, even to get the addresses from the other company where they have deployed these workers, so that we can easily follow up. And also the attach is very, very important. Well, it is still good morning, family. We've come to the end of the first part. Now we are getting into issues at hand.